So let me get this straight. You, Joe Biden, want to tax Mario because he stomps on all of those cute little Koopas. You've got to be kidding me. So for those of you who have not heard the news, my fellow reptiles, Joe Biden actually wants to tax violent video games. Not just violent video games, but games that in general that contain any amount of violence. Regardless of your political affiliation, I think we all can agree here that this is a completely bad idea to tax video games simply based on violence. This story actually reminds me of a paper I wrote back in college for my first 2 years about video games and the cause of violence, because we have all these politicians linking video games and violence together, and my argumentative paper was that video games do not cause violence. Found in my study and not only research is that it is not video games that bring about violence in people, but rather the real cause of this violence is actually from their personality, mental state, and other factors in their life during childhood development and later in their teen years. That is why most of us who play violent video games, myself included, I grew up playing violent video games, do not have violence issues. This is my proposal. What I think we should do is we should have what is known as a stupid jar that we put in Washington. This follows the exact same premise as a swear jar. Every time a president, a vice president, or someone in Congress says a stupid idea, they have to put $1,000 in that stupid jar. That is, if they can afford it. You could probably fix our mental health care with that amount of money. One of the least scrutinized problems of these mass shootings, and the one thing that probably everyone agrees that is the problem and needs to be fixed, the mental health. Or, of course, we can simply just, blame video games. That does help and does not fix anything. Yeah, baby, yeah, let's tax violent video games! That's gonna fix our country's unemployment rate, stop all of the shootings, lower inflation, and prevent prison flow and feed 16,000 children who die every day from starvation. This guy should vote himself another raise. Genius, Joe Biden. Absolutely genius. How about you tax yourself for simply being a douchebag? That sounds more appropriate. So I want to ask my viewers a legitimate question, my fellow reptiles. What's up with movies? Why have we never heard a single peep or reason against films that contain violence, but rather somehow the video games are actually the culprit of all mass shootings of people going around rampaging and killing people? Why don't we tackle movies? Why is it strictly video games? What absolutely infuriates me about this whole story of why we should tax violent video games is that there is no concrete evidence, no research that even suggests that has been founded, and people have invested thousands of dollars into research regarding the topic of violent video games and whether, in fact, it actually causes children to be more violent and do mass shootings and mass killings. There is no concrete evidence to support this claim. This is all an assumption by people who have never wanted to play video games or understand why people play video games. Here's an idea. Let's tax politicians that lie to us. Let's tax them every time they sign a law without actually reading what that law is. But let me ask you guys another question. How many people do you know that play Call of Duty or God of War? Probably a lot. I know I do. How many people do you know that have played those games that have turned into a mass serial killer? Say what? Say what again? Nobody. Yeah, that's right, nobody. Unless there is a pre-existing psychosis or aggressive behavior in that specific individual, not a single person's mind is somehow twisted and turned and made into a violent person simply because they played a violent video game that contains violence. Taxing violent video games is instead punishing those people who have done nothing wrong. Yeah, taxing me, taxing other people who just want to spend an already expensive $50 to $60 for a very overpriced video game to have a campaign for maybe 6 to 7 hours, and then we have, on top of that, we already have sales tax of the video game, which already makes them more expensive, so now we're going to be adding tax to games that contain violence? What? When books became violent, people wanted to burn them. That generation passed. When movies became violent, people wanted to ban them. That generation passed. Now video games have become violent and people want to ban/tax them. In my personal opinion, I think this generation will pass. Hopefully. But until then, we still gotta deal with idiots like Joe Biden. And sorry to burst your bubble, Joe Biden, but the First Amendment doesn't supersede the ability of the government to tax video games. Try extrapolating some civics classes. It'll do you some good.